a film. But when my dad found out, and I experienced his response to it, which was so generous and so selfless and so philosophical and interesting, and he started writing, I suddenly felt like, well, that's actually a really interesting story. Like, to me, that what was interesting was watching him transform through it. And what was also interesting was the way, people would be telling the story, and I would overhear other people in my family telling the story, and the stories didn't seem to resemble each other. And so just the different ways we had processed and remembered what had happened became really interesting to me in terms of exploring through film. But when I wrote you that email, I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. I think that was a slow process of figuring out. Thank God with Anita and then NFB, who really believed in development, which was not a world I come from, where people believe development should be rigorous and long and important. And no process was ever rushed. And then getting to go to the CFC documentary lab and have all those amazing mentors, in John Walker and Shelley Saywell and Kevin Mann, and I was in the same Kevin McMahon, and I was in the same year as I'm not gonna remember everybody right now, but Young Chang, I remember, was in my year, and so we just had constant mentorship and people coming in. It was the first year of that program, and so I really got to take my time, as you know, figuring this out.
Can you now, where you are, do you feel a different relationship to this film because it's documentary compared to other films you've made? Almost 10 years after, and significantly more films, and also you've recently written a memoir as well.
Yeah, what occurred to me is I just watched the last 20 minutes or something, and apologies, I think we totally disrupted the screen. I think what just occurred to me is how much it's my dad's voice, and what a privilege it was to get to capture his voice. And I think he really was a great writer who never published anything. So I really feel like what I kind of hold dear about the film is his perspective and his voice, and being able to capture that. And also just, it was nice to see the end too, and just seeing those those moments with Harry, and the sadness that kind of fell around that relationship, but that, I don't know, it was just nice seeing them kind of whole in that film. They both died a few years ago within 2 months of each other. So just, yeah, seeing everybody alive was kind of nice.
I do recall, I'm pretty sure it was some point in production then when you celebrated your 30th birthday, right? Yes, I do believe, right? And I remember even then when I realized that, having this moment at that time thinking, oh my God, you're such a young woman at the time, making this film. And as a producer at that time, working with you, I recall feeling at times both, kind of worried and protective because you were telling such a personal story. And then at other times, just struck by how wise and how savvy I thought you were. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I just have to learn from Sarah how to kind of navigate life and hold it all together. And I just wondered now, where you are now, what do you think of that Sarah that you see, in this film? And how do you feel now about those stories, and what might you say to her?
Yeah, I really reflect a lot lately on the choice to leave my version out of this film. I think it was the right thing to do for who I was at the time, and maybe the right thing for the film, actually, overall. But I think that when I realized that I had this ultimate authority to be editing everyone else's version, the idea of then laying my own version in there felt undemocratic or unethical in some way that was important to me. But my version really isn't in there, and I do have a version of how this happened and what people said, and that it is not part of the record, and that's interesting. And I think my sort of personal reflection around it, separate from what the film is just my eagerness to disappear myself and my own voice is interesting to me. And again, I'm still very proud of this film, and I'm not sure I would want it to be different. I'm not sure I would want to make it at this age, but I I just am conscious that I didn't tell my story and that suited everyone just fine.
If you could say just in one sentence, you know, obviously this was done over multiple years, and the film, you know, as we understand, has all of these layers of complexity. But if you were to say, from your perspective today, what might that be?
Like in terms of my version of it?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, some of the funnier moments aren't in the movie. Like there was so mine. I can finally say this because everybody's dead. So, so my favorite moment of this, which my dad adamantly denied. So when we reenacted the moment where I tell him, I was like, well, let's do your version of what you remember, then we'll do my version of what I remember you said. And he was like, I'm not doing your version. This is not what I said. And I was like, well, the whole point of the film is different versions, but this is what I remember him saying, and I'm not kidding. With complete, like, as soon as I told him, you know, it sounds like Harry Galkin is my dad, blah, he looked at me with such excitement and leaned and went, oh my God, you're Jewish. He was so happy for me. It was like he was gonna throw me a bat mitzvah or something, and I think it took him like a full 20 minutes to realize it had an implication for his relationship to me. He was like, I did not say that. I'm not doing that. So there's things like that.
It's very hilarious. Okay, we could go on, but you know, just talking about you know, memory and versions and all of this. I actually just started reading your memoir last night. So I have to admit I'm a little bit sleep deprived because I could not put it down. But I was really struck by what I felt were, you know, some of the elements that you were already exploring, you know, in Stories We Tell, and really looking at how the way that we, you know, remember shapes so much who we are, you know, and when you're really examining how experience can also shape memory. And again, not to paraphrase you, but I think you say something to the fact that more recently, with your concussion, with the writing of the memoir, that you've come to realize that and I think this is what you say, that experiences in adulthood can actually now shape and change your memories of the past.
Yeah.
Right? And so today, you're a mother, you're married, you have children, one who I believe is here today. Yes? Others. You know, and so these new experiences now in adulthood, and when you look back at these memories, have your experiences now of motherhood, marriage, family shape your perspective of these memories or this film?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my experience has been so much more empathy and understanding for my parents and the ways in which, you know, they weren't perfect. And I think it is important to sort of go through that and investigate that and understand the ways in which, you know, your parents fell down, and all of our parents have fallen down in some way or failed us in some way. And I do think it's important to go through really reckoning with all of the mess that leaves us with. I do feel, since being a parent, there is a sense of really seeing my own flaws, and so really deeply understanding how and why my parents weren't perfect, but also really appreciating the ways in which they came through, and finding myself bewildered by how they did it. And I just do think that there's, you know, we're, I think, more aware culturally that our childhood experiences really inform who we are in the present and how we perceive the present and our behavior and our actions. But I'm finding more and more that, yeah, being able to have experiences go a different, better way in adulthood changes my relationship to those formative memories. And it's not that the facts of them necessarily change, but I remember different elements of those experiences, or the meaning and context of them change and become more complex and interesting.
Wonderful. So with that, I know people have questions, so I am going to open them up. And right there, yes.
Hi, Sarah. Nice seeing you again. I want to know, were there any family members who kind of gave you a little bit trouble when you tried to interview them as you were making this?
So everybody who's in the film agreed right away. I was really surprised. I could think of a million reasons why people might not want to participate in it. Everyone was incredibly generous. I did make sure that I think almost everybody who was in it got to watch it. I think we screened it for them alone, right? And they could kind of like give honest feedback, and everyone just signed off. Like it was sort of extraordinary. Even the things they were kind of uncomfortable with, they decided it was like important to live with. It was really an amazing experience. My mom's sister didn't want to be in it. I think she was concerned about how it made my mom look, that she had had these affairs, and she was very close to my mom and also quite religious, and so she declined to be interviewed. But again, we have nothing but a good relationship since, even though I don't think she particularly likes the movie, but she's still been so kind to me. I mean, that's what's been amazing about it, is there are people who are mentioned in this film in not flattering lights that still have relationships with everyone involved, and I don't really want to name it, but people who are named in a very unflattering light, by my brother and sister, for instance, are still at family gatherings, included and including others, and it sort of bewilders me, actually, that happened that way. Thanks.
Sarah, I don't know whether you remember, but I went to Montreal and showed the film to Harry.
By yourself.
By
How did
myself.
you get that job? How did you get that job?
And I was terrified. But the best thing was, it was a theater like this, and I sat in the back, and he sat in the middle. I watched him watching the film, and then when the film ended, he turned around, and he said to me, "Tell Sarah, it's a beautiful film. She's done really, really well, but it's not how it happened." And I thought, okay, perfect.
Yeah, I think that Harry felt like, I remember one of his comments was, he said, I feel like it shows me warts and all, and your dad becomes this hero in it. And I was like, Harry, everyone has been whitewashed. Everyone, including you. I took out so many bad things people said about you and everybody else. Like, there is a certain extent to which you kind of go, I want to tell the truth, and I also don't want to wreck people. And so, that's always been my hesitation with documentary, even though I would say it's my favorite form as an audience. But my hesitation has always been the ethics around taking hold of someone's life and telling it in a film form and editing things, and that has always made me nervous. And I thought, well, at least if it's my own family, there's sort of an ethical safeguard there, in that I'm going to have to live with these people, and so it's going to police me. But again, I came up with that in my memoir, right? It's about me and my experiences, but there are other people in it, and that's always tricky stuff to navigate.
Absolutely. Yes, right there. Oh.
Your film's about memory. We've been able to make moving images of ourselves for the last almost 100 years. And you obviously had some film of your mother. You also had to make other film to make it sort of look like the same. Do you think those images affected how you remembered your mother?
Such a good question, which I've never been asked. I think probably the images, did make a difference. And as you said it, what I flashed on is how overly conscious I am when my kids take videos of me. Because I've lived with that footage for so long, it has informed so much, I think, of how I think she also was such a large presence that just so many people had stories about her. So I'm still stopped in the street by people in their 80s and 90s going, your mother was, the person who helped me as an actor, or maybe my grandmother just was so full of life and funny. And so she was a very remembered person. She was a very loved person. But I do think it was amazing, my dad taking all that Super 8 footage, and we would always as a family be looking back and watching it together. So yeah, I do think it makes a big difference. Thanks.
Yes, right here.
I'm so taken with how, people in the film, like you yourself, talked about how the stories. I'm sorry, I guess I have a question for you. Is how did you know that this was it? Like when you were sitting in the edit room, when you were sitting, how did you know that this was the story? Because clearly there was copy on the way to the edit, so if you don't, it changes what the editor says. So how did you know that this was it?
Okay, so that's it's a really interesting question, because I've literally come to understand about myself recently that, so with this film, I will say when we stopped, I went, I'm only 70% done, but I literally can't do it anymore. I just can't. And I know that I didn't get it right, but I can't keep going. And I thought that I realize now with what I'm talking, it was the same thing. It was like, this is just, like, it's just where I think that if you're sort of a perfectionist by nature, like, film doesn't satisfy that. Nothing is ever done. There's always one more layer you could do. And with this, we had a whole other sequence that we had scripted of a theater sequence where each person was going to present their version to an audience, and the audience would be made up of everyone in the story, and they were going to debate. And we were gonna they were gonna debate everyone's versions. It was gonna be like this ugly gladiator pit. Remember that? The theater sequence?
I do.
I remember I kept saying to
Scripted.
you, I know we're gonna get to a certain point where we could make a movie of the Super 8 footage of the interviews, and we're gonna wanna stop, and we have to keep going. We have to do this theater sequence. And so we had this whole section of the budget reserved for it. And then we were all like, we're not doing this theater sequence. There's no way. But to me, it was like a movie that was 2/3 done. But I think that I'm going to feel like that about everything, no matter how hard I work on it, that I will always feel 2/3 done. And so it's just kind of finding out when you're done without having to feel like the thing is done. Because I don't think, for me, that moment doesn't come. I felt that with my book, like everything I've ever done. And who knows, maybe everybody in the audience is like, yeah, you should probably do that next third next time. But I don't want to claim that it worked out. But I do feel like, I've stopped waiting for that feeling to come. Thank you.
Yes, right here.
Hi, Sarah. How did you decide to build the discoveries within the film?
I think building the discoveries was a slow process of figuring it out. I remember putting the cards up on the wall at the beginning, when in the edit suite, like just the index cards of what each scene was. And I remember moving that card of the reveal that my mom had been married before and had lost her first 2 children. And because we had it in chronological order, and I remember moving it into the middle and going, what if we don't know any of that? So we don't actually know this impact on her until later, and it's more of an unpeeling of an onion instead of a linear storytelling model. And I remember us debating that a lot. But I think that sort of realizing that, we had to sort of have, within the craft of how we told the story, a whole narrative about how stories are told and the assumptions we make, and the uncovering of those assumptions had to be part of the package. So it was trial and error, basically. I had a basic idea, and then we played with it. And the development helped, right? It was this unbelievably long development period at the NFB, and it was such a luxury to just slowly be figuring that out. Thanks.
Yes, right there.
Hi, I am just wondering, as I was watching the movie, it occurred to me that you spoke about how your story isn't part of it. There's another very important main character whose story is also not part of the film. And I was just wondering what specific difficulties it presented not being able to interview your mother for this movie.
So not being able to interview my mother or have her say meant being really judicious about what we included and what we didn't. So there are stories about my mom that we just elected to not have in their background that might be helpful to understand her, that wasn't worth it, that wouldn't require her consent, I think, to tell those stories. So, I think that it was also just kind of hard, It was just kind of like hard to feel her absence that acutely on a daily basis after, that many years. I think I also was just aware of, I got very aware of what I could remember and intuit about her sensibility and wanting to make it a film she would like. If my dad could have written the way she always wanted him to write, what would it look like? So in a way, when I watch the film, I think I'm able to like it more than anything I've made, because it doesn't feel like my film. It feels like my dad and my mom's sensibilities interpreted through me with everybody else's voice. And then Mike Munn, who is our editor, was a huge part of, the process of sort of figuring that out. And then there was a moment which I could not be in that editing room as much. And I just said, I can't, I'm bottoming out. I don't know what to do. So I ended up starting to go in very late into the process. I would start going in only 3 days a week. And the other 2 days a week, I signed up for at Woodsworth College. There's this bridging program where for high school dropouts, so you can like apply to university. And so I started doing that half the week, and then I got a break. Then Nita sent me away and was like, "You have this other film, Take This Waltz. Just take I needed air. I went and made Take This Waltz
Okay.
as a hiatus from this."
Do you
And then
hear
came
that?
back.
She therefore went and shot
Yep.
Take This Waltz and came back because she needed a break.
Yeah.
It was a break.
Thank you.
Yes, right here.
So I just had the pleasure of seeing Away from Her at the Lightbox, and I was naturally picking up on certain threads of the film that were kind of in that film, and I was wondering where you were on this kind of journey with your family when you were making that film, and to what extent your personal life informed some of the decisions that you made, and maybe why you were attracted to that story.
I mean, I think that I understand a lot more about it in retrospect. So you probably understand more about it having seen that and then this film than I did when I was making either of them. But I think, looking back at, someone got bored by their mom. Anyway, fair enough. I was starting to bore myself. I think that, I think that like when I look at that footage and Away from Her, of the Super 8 footage of Julie Christie as a young woman staring into the camera, it's so obviously that shot of my mom on the beach in some way, and even Julie, like the way she looks, and there's a sense in which I think there were so many echoes. I also think about how Away from Her is about a man who's losing his wife, and I think within that loss actually being able to articulate or define his love and what that means to him in a way he hasn't been able to before. So I think there were a lot of resonances, and the stuff about memory, obviously, I think is a recurring obsession of mine, which I kind of think with any obsession, you can't completely articulate why it has a hold on you, because I think there's something subconscious there. But I certainly see the connection between those things now. I didn't while I was making it, but thanks.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing how, when you look at a body of an artist's work and how you start to see those connections. And it's funny, Sarah, because I can't remember whether it was a Warris article or something on you, and they had titled it, "Who Do You Think You Are?" And I grabbed onto that because, of course, that's the title of Alice Munro's, one of, early iconic novels, which I loved, and sort of, I remember listening to Alice Munro in some interview, I think it was, around, like, why that title? Like, what does it mean? Like the layer connotations of who do you think you are as to, who do you think you are? The way how one can sort of say it and perceive it. And I too also started to really just see the connections through your work, and how in so many ways, we are trying to figure out who you are, right? Through this creative process. And and today I was really moved by that black and white archival footage of your mom. And I remember, it was a bit of a struggle to get that. And when I saw it today in a way that just, wow, I thought it's in some ways sort of the heart of a film.
Yeah, and also just I always see in that footage just someone who never quite knew their worth. Do you know what I mean? Like, she was so wonderful and so kind of undermined from a young age, I think, and being a woman in the film industry and having this completely unequal relationship with the expectations on her as a woman were so sort of unfair, both at work and at home. And, just the constant introducing of insecurity into this person who's like really beautiful and magnetic on stage, but you can just see her kind of crushing herself on the inside. I find that really hard to watch.
Yes, there's so many hands. I'll take the gentleman right there. Yes. Go ahead.
Harry, at one point towards the end of the film, says he wants to tell the story because he was only one of two parties to the other. It seems to me, if you were approaching this as an investigative reporter, you could have talked to lots of other people who were witnesses to what went on. Did you hold yourself back for some reason? Did you say, consciously or subconsciously, this is as far as I wanna go?
I think so, yeah, and I think that was a combination of factors. So one was, my dad had written this long, beautiful document that we sort of pulled from, and it became more and more the spine of the film. As we worked on it, he became more and more focal in terms of it being his journey. I think also, again, I really didn't want to, I wanted to be truthful and honest, but I didn't want to unnecessarily hurt anybody. And some of those interviews I did of corroborating witnesses, had things to say that maybe would have upset people to have in the film unnecessarily. So I think with everything, I mean, I know this is unpopular amongst serious artists, but I think doing a kindness pass is not a bad idea. I think generally doesn't hurt the thing you're making, unless you're making a hard-hitting political expose, in which case, I think people should go nuts. But I think that, yeah. So there were that factored into some decisions around that as well. But he does have a longer version of the story, and he probably did have more to say about it. I think we included most of his version in the film. Thanks.
Yes, right in the front here. Yes.
I've seen this movie 3 times, and this time I actually got quite emotional when your father was talking. I wonder, he seemed like he was kind of a reserved man, and then telling the story, he tells the love story about your mom. But then at the end, it was so touching about his relationship with you. I just wondered if you had that kind of reserve in your relationship, and if that process of him telling that stories and those words how that affected you and your relationship with him.
Yeah, I mean, he did have a certain reserve about him. I think it's like partly being, an Englishman of his generation. That was probably pretty normal. But yeah, I think he had a hard time expressing affection. I do think we got extremely close through the process of making the film. And I mean, we were always close in a way, I always made sure, we lived within a block or two. So we lived in that house in Aurora, and then I moved downtown, and a few years later I found a place for him on the same block. And, whenever I would move, I would find a place close by. And, I always saw him and talked to him pretty frequently. But I think that through the process of making the film, we absolutely did get closer. And I remember we actually rushed the first screening of the film for the cast and crew. We rushed because we could feel my dad's health deteriorate really quickly suddenly. And I remember Anita's, like a magician, pulled this screening out within weeks to make sure he could see it with his full conscious mind. It might have been one of the last really lucid days he had, was getting to watch the final film. And I remember him just like, as soon as it was over, grabbing my hand and going like this. And it was so lovely, because at that point it was getting hard for him to communicate. He died of dementia. So I could sense and in fact, the beginning of shooting this film, the first footage we shot, I didn't really know what we were going to do with it. I just knew I wanted to interview him for 3 or 4 days because I could feel his memory was starting to go. So I thought, I just want to get this on film, then I don't know where we go from there. But that was also the impetus to start making it. And then it took about 5 years. So by the time it was done, he was not completely gone, but quite declined.
Yes, right there.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
This is less about the movie and more about your personal journey uncovering sort of what you uncovered. Weirdly, I find myself in an adjacent situation, and I'm curious as to whether or not, if the person who ended up being your father was, here he seems like a decent person. If in the journey you found that the person was less than decent, less than decent is the way to say it, do you think you would have continued trying to find out more, or even have made the movie?
So the first year with Harry was kind of this honeymoon period, which I think is very common when you find a biological parent, where you project a lot of stuff onto each other. So I would say the falling out of love was mutual. Like I would say I disappointed him as much as he disappointed me, and I think that's important to state because he's not here to tell his version. But I think both of us thought we were getting the thing we didn't have, and in fact nobody could have fulfilled whatever gap that was for both of us. So there was a sense of disappointment for sure. If he had been really disappointing right away, no, I wouldn't have been interested in continuing a relationship or including him in the film. There was enough there in that first year that it carried us through somewhat, but not forever. And I think, the relationship was much worse by the end. And certainly even by the time this film came out, the relationship had really deteriorated quite seriously. I think partly because, I felt like my dad was being so gracious to him, and when they would meet at gatherings and around the film, my dad would be going out of his way to accommodate Harry, and I didn't know that Harry was being as gracious towards my dad, and it felt like my dad was in the position of the one who was potentially the most hurt in the situation. So, I don't know. There were a lot of amazing things about Harry. He was a huge mentor to so many important filmmakers in Quebec, and he was an incredible person and very loved. But yeah, things did get tricky. We're both, probably in my DNA, I got some of his controlling nature as well. So probably together, it's just too much of that DNA strand.
Yes, right here.
Yeah, so as a, hi Sarah, as a Jewish Montrealer who spent a lot of time in the Mile-End, I worked there for about 5 years. I am curious about your discovery of your latent Judaism. Did that affect your output, your body of work, just your worldview generally?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so, we celebrate holidays. I'm very close with Harry's daughter, Kathy, or my sister, Kathy. I'm probably as close to her as any of my siblings, which has been amazing. I feel like the big gain out of all this was this incredible sibling. She's deeply involved with my kids. Like, she's just an amazing person. So, yeah, we celebrate holidays and stuff. I did get very, very interested in Judaism, and over the pandemic, we did Friday night dinners, and then my kids rebelled. So that's not happening anymore. But yeah, I've always been really interested in Judaism. I continue to be. I'm not a practicing Jew, but I'm interested in it. We celebrate holidays. Thanks.
Okay, one last question, so I'll go to the back. Yes, I think you had your hand up first.
Hi. So, as you said previously, you didn't put your version of the story in the movie. But when you were developing this idea to become a documentary, was there ever a time where you're like, I might put myself in front? And if so, what led you to the decision not to put yourself out there? And if, as you said, you could change anything, you might have put your version into it. I don't know if that makes sense. But
It does totally make sense. So I did write my version, and that was going to be one of the 3 versions that was going to get defended in front of the theater of subjects in the documentary. I think I just, first of all, found my version less interesting. I already knew it. And also, yeah, I just slowly felt like it was somewhat undemocratic to have control over everyone else's version and include mine. I did write it. But yeah, I don't remember exactly when we decided we were dropping it, or I don't know.
I feel like we'd actually been filming for a while, and as you said, we always had this in the back of our head. Yes, and we'll be doing, right, that shoot. And then I feel like because you were editing throughout the process, it wasn't all shot and then the editing began. It was done in fragments. And I think it was really at some point because, there really was a sense there was enough of a film already. And finally you sort of said, yeah, I don't think we need to do that, right?
Yeah, and we would, in between sections, we would edit. So we did the interviews, and we edited those with the existing footage. From there, we decided what we were going to shoot with the recreations. We did a whole feature film shoot for 20 days on Super 8 with a full crew.
That was the best. We had to go out and scout every Super 8 camera in the city. We would go to the strangest basements to get them.
Yeah, and Iris Singh, our cinematographer, was so rigorous about that testing. We all thought she might have lost her mind, but then we're so grateful to her later. But yeah, so we did a full shoot in Super 8, and then we edited that. And then, yeah, so it was, a few stages of editing.
So unfortunately, we do have to wrap up, but thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
And again, just to say, Women Talking opens here at the Lightbox December 23rd. Please come, tell your friends,